Ahora sí, sin más preámbulos, podremos escuchar, y espero que correctamente, a Emilia Roig. Emilia Roig es fundadora y directora ejecutiva del Centro por la Justicia Interseccional de Berlín y es doctora en Ciencias Políticas. Y hoy nos hablará de lo que puede aportar la interseccionalidad a las políticas locales europeas. Muchas gracias.
So we had a few technical issues, so I'm going to do a video. I hope it reaches you well. So as I said, it's a pleasure for me to speak at this conference, which aims to put into practice intersectionality in public policies, and especially in local public policies meant to combat discrimination. I think it's an amazing first step that is being taken here to try to see best practices and also how to go about it concretely, because intersectionality tends to be mostly discussed in academic spheres. But for now, let's take a closer look at intersectionality. What does it mean? Intersectionality describes the ways in which systems of inequality based on gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, class, and other forms of discrimination intersect to create unique dynamics and effects. For example, when a woman of color in a wheelchair is being discriminated, it would be impossible to dissociate her woman identity from her disabled identity, from her identity of a person of color, and all the dimensions causing her discrimination. All forms of inequality are mutually reinforcing and must therefore be analyzed and addressed simultaneously to prevent one form of the inequality from reinforcing another. As Kimberly Crenshaw generously put it, a truly intersectional feminism can reach everyone on the planet. And so this could be said for everything. We could say a truly intersectional anti-discrimination policy can reach everyone in the country. So if we make sure that the most marginalized people within social movements are visible, get their voices heard, and their interests represented, we can be sure that the rights of all other groups will be. Intersectionality brings our understanding of systemic injustice and social inequality to the next level by attempting to untangle the lines that create the complex web of inequalities. It is also a practical tool that can be used to tackle intersectional discrimination through policies and laws. Intersectionality often appears as a purely functional term, a new addition to the institutional vocabulary and list of terms that should be included in funding applications or project descriptions. But it doesn't do justice to its subversive power, to its origins. And so at this point, I think especially in Europe, it's really important to remind that intersectionality originates from Black women and women of color in the United States. And it was initially mobilized to address the lack of consideration of racial oppression within the hegemonic feminist movements. So the travel of intersectionality from USA to Europe and from the margins to the center hasn't been entirely unproblematic. This transformation has been characterized by the erasure of race and by a general depoliticization of the concept, as Sirma Bilgi and Gay Lewis put it. So the erosion of its most central category, race, in a European context that considers itself post-racial meaning that racism belongs to the past, it equates to believing that at a specific point in time, a system or country stopped being racist. For example, after the Second World War in Germany, or after the election of Barack Obama in the United States, or that a country is colorblind, meaning that skin color and race are believed to be irrelevant. So, for example, a statement like, oh, no, we don't see race, or we're all humans, is representative of colorblindness. So by leaving out race of intersectionality, we prevent it from unfolding its full potential. And by erasing race, we suggest that difference is something negative, that we should not pay attention to it. But the problem is not difference, but hierarchy. So for example, saying that, we should erase this, that all of us are human, that no, we don't see that some people are Black, some others not, that we have, different heritages, different backgrounds, is misguided. Because the problem is not our differences. We should embrace those differences, but tackle the hierarchization, saying, okay, white people are superior to black people, or Roma people are inferior to white people. So some people believe that intersectionality is a tool of division rather than a tool for unity, and that intersectionality entails dividing groups into so many subgroups, pushing identity politics to the extreme and weakening our movements. But on the contrary, intersectionality helps us move beyond fixed identities and create more encompasses identity politics. Because identities are complex, they're flexible, multiple, and most importantly, they are societal, historical, and political mirrors of who we really are. They say more about the way we are perceived than about our intrinsic selves. So, in this line, Black people are made by supremacy and colonialism. LGBT people are not born LGBT, but made LGBT by patriarchy, binarism, and heteronormativity. It means that it is those fixed binaries and the normalization of heterosexuality that creates others and that creates deviation to the heterosexual norm. A person with disability is not born disabled, but made disabled by the societal structures and medical system that construct the notion of healthy and able, including capitalism and racism. In addition to this, most of us occupy in-between spaces. Our identities are flexible, contextual, they may change over time and depending on where we find ourselves. So for example, in Germany, I'm a Black woman. In France, I'm métisse. If I'm going to Senegal, I will be considered white. So intersectionality helps us move beyond the individual level and raise to a systemic level where we look at systems of domination and oppression and organize around them. For instance, an LGBT movement, which is not inclusive of people of color and poor people, and doesn't address racism and classism, will very likely endorse binarism, heteronormativity, and neoliberal politics. Intersectionality helps us move beyond the individual level and raise to a systemic level where we look at systems of domination and oppression and organize around them. So in practice, because we're talking about intersectionality and public policies. So intersectionality, unlike what many people think, is not about tackling all forms of discrimination at once, at the same time. This would in fact be impossible. So instead, an intersectional approach to discrimination and inequality seeks to identify and address processes of marginalization and exclusion within an anti-discrimination efforts that focus solely on one dimension. So it is about fighting discrimination within discrimination, tackling inequalities within inequalities, and protecting minorities within minorities. For example, inequalities within the category woman will not become visible unless we move away from the single-axis dichotomy man-woman to include further dimensions such as race, religion, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, and gender identity. Similarly, the specific interests and needs of racial, ethnic, and religious minorities within LGBTQI movements, say LGBTQI refugees, are usually not adequately met because their experience is marginalized within the wider movement. Their exclusion can be attributed to the fact that their culture and religion tend to be considered as incompatible with their sexual orientation or identity. Acknowledging such inequalities and processes of discrimination within movements is the precondition for effective policy and lawmaking in the field of gender equality and equal opportunity policies. So an intersectional approach ensures that no one is left behind in the fight for justice and equality. It ensures that communities and movements are inclusive of differences and work together towards equality. It prevents combating one form of discrimination at the expense of another. So, to conclude, I would say that intersectionality is not a luxury, it is our only choice. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very fruitful conference. I'm really sad that I cannot be there in person, but I'm sure that you will bring the matter forward, and also sharing best practices will lead the way for progress in that matter. Thank you very much.